The twin blue moons of Vera 9 hung low above the horizon, casting pale light across a wilderness unlike anything found on Earth. Vast wetlands stretched for hundreds of kilometers, glowing softly with bioluminescent plants that pulsed like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Rivers of silver water twisted between giant mushroom-like trees whose translucent caps shimmered with streams of flowing data carried by microscopic organisms engineered thousands of years ago. Ethan Ward sat on the roof of his aging exploration vehicle, watching the landscape through a pair of scanning goggles. His transport hovered half a meter above the muddy ground, occasionally producing an alarming mechanical noise. The vehicle beeped, and it beeped again, then emitted a long, whining sound. Ethan sighed. That doesn't sound expensive at all. The onboard artificial intelligence immediately replied. Correction. It sounds extremely expensive. Thank you for your support. You are welcome. Your financial ruin is important to me. Ethan shook his head and climbed down from the vehicle. After 6 years wandering distant colonies and forgotten worlds, he had learned that traveling with a sarcastic AI was only slightly better than traveling alone. His current destination was a collection of ancient ruins buried somewhere beneath the wetlands of Vera 9. Archaeologists believed the structures predated most known galactic civilizations. Naturally, that made them valuable. And naturally, it also made them dangerous. A distant roar echoed across the marsh. Ethan looked toward the sky. Several sleek starships crossed overhead in perfect formation. Their silver hulls reflected moonlight as they descended toward the northern region of the wetlands. Military? Ethan asked. The AI processed the image. Royal escort formation, probability 97%. A queen visiting a swamp. That's either very brave or very poor vacation planning. The AI paused. Historical evidence supports the second possibility. Ethan laughed and resumed walking. Hours later, he reached a ridge overlooking a massive valley of wetlands. The sight immediately caught his attention. Hundreds of personnel occupied the area. Floating platforms hovered above the swamp. Recon drones moved through the air. Security fields projected shimmering blue barriers around a temporary camp. In the center stood an elegant vessel, unlike any Ethan had ever seen. Its hull curved like liquid silver. Its surface contained no visible seams. Ancient symbols glowed softly across the metal. Definitely royalty, Ethan muttered. As he observed from a distance, activity suddenly increased. Soldiers began moving. Officers shouted orders. Several drones accelerated toward the eastern marsh. At first, Ethan assumed it was a routine operation. Then, he heard the screaming. The voice belonged to a child. Even from this distance, panic carried clearly across the wetlands. Ethan immediately raised his goggles. A zoom lens activated. The image sharpened. His expression changed. Far beyond the camp, nearly a kilometer into the swamp, a young alien girl struggled desperately in dark mud. She looked mostly human, though her pointed long ears revealed her royal lineage. Every movement caused her to sink deeper. Nearby soldiers attempted rescue operations. None succeeded. One hovercraft tilted sideways and vanished beneath the surface. A rescue drone exploded after colliding with a cluster of glowing vines. Another team became trapped by moving vegetation. The situation deteriorated with every passing second. Ethan lowered the goggles slowly. What exactly am I looking at? The AI responded. Based on current evidence, a terrible day. For several seconds, Ethan simply watched. The soldiers possessed advanced technology, heavy equipment, specialized rescue gear, yet somehow the child remained trapped. Then another transport sank into the mire. A frustrated officer threw his helmet into the mud. The helmet immediately disappeared. The officer stared. So that's gone forever. Even in the middle of a crisis, several nearby soldiers groaned at the absurdity. Ethan found himself smiling despite the tension. Then, he looked back toward the sinking child. The smile vanished. Something about the rescue attempts felt wrong. The swamp wasn't behaving naturally, and while everyone else seemed focused on adding more technology to the problem, Ethan had the uncomfortable feeling that the technology itself might be the reason the problem was getting worse. Ethan remained motionless on the ridge, while the rescue operation below descended further into chaos. Through his goggles, he watched another squad attempt to reach the trapped girl using anti-gravity harnesses. The moment their equipment powered up, the swamp reacted violently. The surface of the mire began bubbling. Dozens of glowing tendrils burst upward. The soldiers barely escaped before the vines wrapped around their harnesses and dragged them into the mud. A collective groan rose from the camp. One exhausted officer rubbed his face. "That was our 8th plan." A nearby technician checked a data screen. "Actually, sir, that was plan 11. The officer stared at him. "What happened to 9 and 10? They exploded. The officer looked toward the sky. "I need a vacation." Ethan lowered the goggles. The more he watched, the stranger everything became. The swamp wasn't attacking randomly. It was responding specifically to energy emissions. Every drone, every shield generator, every rescue vehicle. The advanced technology the Royal Forces depended upon was provoking the environment. His AI reached the same conclusion. Analysis complete. Let me guess. The swamp hates technology. Ethan nodded. Finally, something in this galaxy understands me. The AI ignored the joke. Energy-based equipment increases biological aggression by approximately 300%. Ethan looked back toward the trapped child. The alien girl was now sinking almost to her waist. Despite her situation, she continued waving angrily at the soldiers. Even from this distance, he could hear fragments of her voice through the camp communication channels. "Stop arguing and save me. We are trying, Princess. Try faster." Ethan blinked. Princess. That explained the level of panic spreading through Nest and Mare. A royal daughter trapped in one of the deadliest ecosystems on the planet was not the kind of event governments enjoyed explaining afterward. A transport descended from orbit overhead. Its engines illuminated the wetlands. More soldiers poured into the area. More equipment, more weapons, more technology. Immediately, the swamp began reacting again. The mud churned. Strange glowing organisms emerged from beneath the surface. The rescue situation became even worse. Ethan sighed. Nobody here is noticing the pattern. "Many intelligent beings become less intelligent during emergencies," the AI replied. "Comforting. Statistically accurate." After several minutes, Ethan finally started walking toward the camp. No grand plan had formed in his mind. He simply wanted a closer look. The security perimeter stopped him before he reached the command area. 2 armored guards blocked his path. Both possessed silver armor decorated with royal insignias. One of them pointed toward the outer perimeter. "Civilian area is behind you." "I'm aware." "Then why are you here?" Ethan glanced toward the swamp. "Because everyone is trying to save the princess using enough energy to power a city." Neither guard seemed amused. The second guard folded his arms. "And your solution? Turn everything off." Several nearby officers overheard him. The reaction was immediate. One laughed. Another rolled his eyes. A third nearly choked on his drink. The commander approached slowly. "You believe our best scientists failed because they forgot to turn things off?" "No," Ethan answered calmly. "I think they failed because they turned too many things on." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then several people laughed again. The commander shook his head. "Human, this swamp has killed entire military units." "That's encouraging." "It wasn't meant to be." Ethan looked past him toward the distant princess. The girl had stopped shouting. That worried him far more than the soldiers mocking his suggestion. She was sinking deeper. The commander followed his gaze. His expression darkened. The jokes vanished. For the first time, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. Ethan pointed toward the swamp. "Tell me something." "What?" "Before all the vehicles arrived, before the drones, before the rescue teams." The commander frowned. "What about it? Was the swamp attacking her this aggressively?" The officer opened his mouth, then stopped. Several technicians nearby exchanged nervous glances. Nobody answered immediately because they already knew the truth. The situation had grown worse every time they introduced more technology into the rescue attempt. And for the first time since arriving, Ethan saw doubt spreading through the command staff. Far out in the darkness, something enormous shifted beneath the surface of the swamp. Something that had not been awake when this disaster began. Something that was slowly beginning to wake up. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The command center had become strangely quiet. Technicians stared at their screens. Officers exchanged uncertain looks. The realization spreading through the camp was uncomfortable. because it suggested something simple might have been overlooked in the middle of a highly sophisticated rescue operation. The commander finally crossed his arms. "You think our equipment is causing the swamp's aggression?" "I don't think," Ethan replied. "I know." The commander raised an eyebrow. "That's a very confident statement." Ethan pointed toward a nearby surveillance display. The screen showed real-time environmental data from the swamp. "Look at the biological activity spikes." Several technicians followed his finger. The reading showed enormous increases whenever drones, vehicles, or energy shields approached the area. One scientist frowned. "Those spikes correspond perfectly with rescue deployments." Another quickly checked archived recordings. A moment later, his eyes widened. "Oh." Several officers looked at him. "Oh, what?" The scientist swallowed. "The human is right." Nobody seemed happy to hear that. One guard sighed dramatically. "I hate when outsiders are right." A second guard nodded. "It's one of the most irritating things in the galaxy." Even under the circumstances, a few exhausted personnel laughed. Far across the swamp, Princess Lyana remained trapped. The mud had reached her ribs now. Her long silver hair clung to her shoulders. Her pointed ears twitched whenever another rescue vehicle activated nearby. Unlike most children, however, Lyana seemed more annoyed than frightened. Through an open communication channel, her voice suddenly echoed across the camp. "If everyone is done having meetings, I'd like to stop sinking now." Several technicians winced. The commander rubbed his forehead. "Princess, we're doing everything we can. Based on current results, that's not encouraging." A few soldiers looked away to hide smiles. Apparently, royal sarcasm was hereditary. The commander turned back toward Ethan. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Ethan removed the scanner from around his neck. "Everybody powers down." The silence returned. One officer stared at him. "You want us to disable everything?" "Everything. That includes rescue systems." "Yes." "Communication equipment?" "Yes." "Weapons?" "Yes." A long pause followed. Then the officer pointed toward the swamp. "There is a giant death swamp out there. I'm aware. And your plan is to walk into it." "More or less." The officer looked genuinely offended. "That's not a plan. It's the beginning of one." Before anyone could argue further, the swamp suddenly trembled. A deep vibration rolled beneath the ground. Every sensor in the camp activated simultaneously. Warning lights flashed. Several drones launched automatically. The moment their engines powered up, the swamp erupted. Huge glowing vines burst from the mud. One drone was instantly crushed. Another disappeared beneath the surface. A third exploded spectacularly. Everyone watched the fireball. The AI inside Ethan's scanner spoke quietly. That drone had a very short and meaningful life. Ethan coughed to hide a laugh. The commander looked less amused. The tremor continued. This time, everyone felt it. Not just through sensors, through their feet. The swamp itself was moving. Scientists rushed to their displays. Environmental readings climbed higher and higher. One technician suddenly went pale. "Commander?" "What?" The technician pointed toward the screen. The biological mass beneath the swamp was enormous, far larger than anyone had predicted. The commander stared. "That has to be a sensor malfunction." "It isn't." "Check again." The technician checked, then checked a third time. The answer remained unchanged. A giant life form was awakening beneath the wetlands, and it extended for kilometers. The command center erupted into activity. Orders flew across communication channels. Emergency alerts spread through the camp. Meanwhile, Ethan simply watched the swamp. His expression had become serious. The movement wasn't random. The creature beneath the wetlands wasn't merely reacting, it was waking up. Far away, Lyana apparently noticed the panic. Her voice echoed through the emergency channel. "Why does everyone suddenly look terrified?" Nobody answered. She frowned. "That's usually not a good sign." A scientist finally spoke. "Princess, yes, there may be a large organism beneath you." "How large?" The scientist hesitated. "Very large." The princess groaned. "Can anyone on this planet ever give a comforting answer?" Even now, laughter spread through parts of the camp. Only briefly, because moments later something enormous moved beneath the mud behind her. The surface of the swamp rose, not by centimeters, by meters, and for the first time, Ethan realized the legends surrounding the forbidden mire might actually be true. Something ancient had been sleeping beneath the wetlands for centuries, and thanks to the endless flood of energy from the rescue operation, it was finally opening its eyes. The entire swamp seemed to breathe. Dark water rose and fell in slow waves, as if an invisible giant were sleeping beneath the surface. The glowing plants scattered across the wetlands dimmed and brightened in strange rhythms, responding to something awakening far below. Inside the command center, alarm tones echoed continuously. Scientists rushed between holographic displays. Military officers argued over emergency protocols. Nobody liked the numbers appearing on the sensors. The estimated mass of the life form beneath the swamp continued increasing. Every new scan produced worse results. One technician finally broke the silence. The creature is larger than the royal flagship. Another checked the readings. Correction. The room turned toward him. He swallowed. It's much larger. Nobody found that comforting. Far across the wetlands, Princess Lyana remained trapped in the mud. The swamp had reached her chest now, but surprisingly, she remained calm. Mostly. Can someone tell me if the giant monster under me is friendly? Silence answered her. Lyana frowned. I feel like that silence means no. The communication channel crackled. One nervous scientist finally replied, "We don't know yet." Wonderful. That's almost as bad. Several soldiers laughed despite themselves. Even under pressure, the princess somehow managed to sound irritated rather than frightened. Meanwhile, Ethan continued studying the swamp. The more he watched, the more convinced he became the brute force would only make things worse. The commander approached him again. This time, there was far less arrogance in his expression. "What would you do?" Ethan glanced at him. "That's a dangerous question." "Why?" "Because you might not like the answer." The commander folded his arms. "Try me." Ethan pointed toward the rescue zone. "Shut everything down." The commander sighed. "We already discussed that. And you're still arguing with reality." Before the officer could respond, a deep roar rolled across the wetlands. The sound did not come from the air. It came from beneath the ground itself. The swamp surface exploded upward. Massive roots emerged from the mud. Not vines, not plants, roots thicker than buildings. They rose slowly into the moonlit sky, dripping black water. Several soldiers instinctively stepped backward. One guard whispered something. Another guard looked at him. "What?" "I was just updating my life priorities." "What does that mean?" "It means I suddenly don't care about promotions anymore." A few nearby personnel laughed nervously. The roots continued climbing. Ancient symbols glowed across their surfaces. Blue light pulsed through hidden channels inside the living structures. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Those weren't natural markings. They looked engineered, created. Someone had altered this organism long ago, perhaps thousands of years ago. The AI inside his scanner spoke quietly. "Unusual biological architecture detected. You noticed too?" The giant glowing alien root skyscrapers were a subtle clue. Ethan smiled despite the situation. Then the sky suddenly brightened. A brilliant silver vessel descended through the clouds. The royal flagship. Every soldier immediately straightened. The command center became silent. The enormous ship settled above the wetlands, casting silver light across the swamp. Moments later, a transport platform emerged from its underside. Several figures stepped onto it, elite guards in ceremonial armor, royal advisors, and at their center stood a woman whose presence immediately drew every eye. Queen Elyra. Even from a distance, she looked extraordinary. She appeared human at first glance, but her long, elegant ears revealed her alien heritage. Silver hair flowed over dark royal armor, decorated with glowing symbols. Her pale eyes reflected the light of the moons like polished crystal. The moment she stepped onto the platform, the atmosphere changed. Every soldier knelt. Every officer lowered their head. The queen ignored them all. Her gaze moved directly toward the distant swamp, toward her daughter. For a brief moment, Ethan saw something beneath her calm expression. Fear. Not the fear of a ruler, the fear of a mother. A royal advisor hurried toward her. "We are preparing additional rescue assets." "No." The queen's voice was calm but absolute. The advisor froze. "Your Majesty?" "No more machines." The commander blinked. Ethan looked toward her. Interesting. She had already reached the same conclusion. Far away, Lyana suddenly spotted the flagship. "Mother!" Her voice echoed across the wetlands. The queen took a step forward. The princess forced a smile. "You picked a terrible day to visit." For the first time, a faint smile appeared on Elyra's face. Then another tremor shook the swamp. The enormous roots shifted again, and something even larger began rising beneath them, something that made every previous reading seem small. The swamp erupted. Water, mud, and glowing vegetation exploded upward as an enormous structure emerged from beneath the wetlands. At first, everyone thought it was a creature. Then the sensors produced new readings. The command center immediately descended into confusion. "It's biological." "No, it's mechanical." "It can't be both." "It appears to be both." Nobody liked that answer. Ancient roots rose hundreds of meters into the air, twisting around metallic frameworks hidden beneath centuries of mud. Blue energy pulsed through living tissue fused with technology so old that no database could identify its origin. Ethan stared. "That's not a swamp creature." His AI immediately agreed. "Correction, it is a swamp creature. It looks like a machine. It also looks like a swamp. You're not helping." "That has never been my primary function." Nearby scientists were having similar problems. One researcher pointed toward the readings. "The biological cells are alive." Another shook her head. "The technological systems are active." A third scientist looked exhausted. "I officially hate whatever civilization built this." Far away, Princess Lyana watched the giant structure rise from the mud. Her eyes widened. "Oh!" The communication channel crackled. The queen immediately responded. "Lyana, I think the swamp has become ambitious." Several soldiers laughed despite the tension. Queen Elyra closed her eyes briefly. Even in danger, her daughter somehow found opportunities for sarcasm. The giant structure continued rising. Ancient symbols illuminated across its surface, one after another. Thousands of glowing markings. The entire swamp brightened beneath the twin moons. Then the symbols began responding to energy emissions from the camp. Every powered vehicle triggered a reaction. Every shield, every drone. The creature-machine hybrid grew more active with each signal. Ethan turned toward the commander. "Now do you believe me?" The officer sighed. "I was hoping you were wrong." "So was I." For several moments the commander remained silent. Then he made a decision. "Power down all non-essential systems." The order shocked everyone. Technicians hesitated. Military officers exchanged uncertain looks. The commander repeated himself. "Ladies and gentlemen, the human has embarrassed our entire military operation. Shut everything down." This time, laughter spread through the command center. Even the technicians smiled while following the order. One by one, systems powered off. The effect was immediate. The enormous structure slowed. The glowing symbols dimmed. The violent movement within the swamp decreased. The camp fell silent. For the first time since the disaster began, the wetlands seemed calmer. Ethan nodded. "Much better." The queen observed everything from her command platform. Her crystal-like eyes shifted toward Ethan. She had not spoken to him yet, but she was watching him carefully. The commander noticed. "Her Majesty is looking at you." "I noticed." "That's usually a good thing." "Usually?" The commander pretended not to hear that. Meanwhile, Lyana remained trapped. The mud now pressed against her shoulders. Time was running out. Even with the swamp calmer, rescue remained necessary. The queen stepped forward. "Human," her voice carried across the camp. Everyone turned toward Ethan. He suddenly became aware that thousands of people were staring at him. "I hate when that happens," he muttered. The AI answered immediately. "You consistently place yourself in situations where it happens." "Fair point," Queen Elyra continued speaking. "You understand something about this swamp that my experts do not." "Maybe. Can you reach my daughter?" The entire camp waited. Ethan looked toward the distant princess. The route ahead was dangerous, unstable ground, unknown biological hazards, an ancient creature awakening beneath the wetlands. Reasonable people would probably decline. Unfortunately, Ethan had never been especially reasonable. He studied the terrain carefully, the glowing roots, the floating vegetation, the inactive zones now appearing after the energy shutdown. A path was beginning to reveal itself. Difficult, dangerous, but possible. Finally, he nodded. "I think I can." The Queen's expression remained calm. The reaction of everyone else was very different. Several officers looked horrified. One scientist whispered something. Another scientist nodded rapidly. A guard simply said, "He's insane." His partner answered, "Yes, but he may be useful." Far away, Lyana heard the conversation through the communication channel. "You found a volunteer?" "Possibly," replied the Queen. The princess brightened immediately. "Excellent." Ethan frowned. "Why does that sound suspicious?" Liana's grin became visible, even from the distance. "Because if you're coming all the way out here, I'm assigning you the honorary rank of temporary rescue hero." Ethan sighed. "I don't think that's a real title." "It is now." Laughter spread through the camp again. But beneath the humor, anticipation was growing. Because for the first time since the disaster began, someone had found a possible path through the swamp. And moments later, Ethan began removing every piece of advanced equipment from his body. He was preparing to enter the wetlands alone. The camp watched in complete silence as Ethan removed the last piece of advanced equipment from his body. His scanner, his communicator, his emergency beacon, even the compact energy tool attached to his belt. One by one, they were placed on a nearby crate. The commander stared. "You are seriously doing this?" Ethan looked at the growing pile. "When you say it like that, it sounds irresponsible." "It is irresponsible." "Good, then we're all in agreement." Several nearby soldiers laughed. The tension that had gripped the camp for hours loosened slightly, not because anyone felt safer, because humor was easier than thinking about what could happen next. Queen Elyra stood motionless on the command platform, her silver eyes following Ethan's every movement. Her long ears twitched slightly as she listened to final reports from her advisors. "The path remains unstable." "I know. Unknown biological hazards detected." "I know. The ancient organism continues awakening." The Queen slowly looked toward the advisor. "I am aware." The advisor wisely decided to stop talking. Meanwhile, Ethan stepped toward the edge of the swamp. The glowing wetlands stretched before him like an alien ocean. Floating plants drifted across black water. Bioluminescent spores drifted through the air. Ancient roots rose from the mire like the ruins of forgotten towers. Far in the distance, Princess Lyana watched him approach. The mud had nearly reached her shoulders now. When she saw him standing at the edge of the swamp, she tilted her head. "You're the volunteer?" "I was hoping they'd found someone smarter." The princess smiled. "Bad news." "I guessed." A few nearby soldiers listening through the communication channel chuckled. Ethan crouched beside the shoreline and studied the terrain one final time. Without the interference of energy fields, the wetlands looked different, calmer. Natural pathways were becoming visible between clusters of floating vegetation. The swamp was practically revealing how it wanted to be crossed. Most people simply hadn't been listening. The AI's voice came from the equipment crate behind him. "Probability of survival?" Ethan didn't turn around. "Low? Extremely low." "Thank you." "You are welcome." He smiled. Then he stepped into the swamp. The entire camp held its breath. The mud accepted his weight without resistance. One step, then another. Nothing attacked. Nothing exploded. Nothing emerged from the water. A murmur spread through the observers. The commander frowned. "Interesting." A scientist checked environmental readings. "The biological activity is dropping." Another scientist looked shocked. Rapidly, the giant roots surrounding the rescue zone had also become still. Their glowing symbols dimmed. The enormous creature machine beneath the swamp remained awake, but it no longer seemed agitated. Ethan continued moving, slowly, carefully. Several times he stopped to test the ground before committing his weight. The journey looked simple from a distance. It wasn't. One mistake would send him into mud deep enough to swallow a vehicle. Far overhead, the twin moons reflected across the wetlands. Their pale light mixed with the glow of alien plants, creating rivers of blue and silver stretching into the darkness. For a brief moment, the swamp seemed almost beautiful. Then Ethan nearly stepped into a sinkhole. "Never mind," he muttered. "Much less beautiful." The princess laughed. The sound carried surprisingly far. "You almost fell. Thank you for the update." "You're welcome." The conversation continued as he moved, partly because Lyana enjoyed talking, mostly because talking prevented both of them from focusing on how dangerous the situation actually was. Minutes passed. Slowly, steadily, Ethan crossed terrain that had defeated dozens of rescue teams. The camp watched in disbelief. One officer finally whispered what everyone else was thinking. "He's actually doing it." Then, The swamp moved. Not violently, not aggressively. A low vibration passed through the water. Every scientist immediately checked their sensors. The ancient organism beneath the wetlands was active again. But this time, the readings were different. The creature wasn't preparing to attack. It was watching. Ancient symbols illuminated across distant roots. Blue light pulsed through hidden channels buried beneath the swamp. One of the researchers suddenly looked pale. "What is it?" asked the commander. The scientist stared at his screen. "The organism is tracking him." The commander's expression hardened. "Is that bad?" The scientist hesitated. "I honestly don't know." Far ahead, Ethan finally reached the last stretch of swamp separating him from the princess. Only 20 meters remained. For the first time, Lyana looked genuinely relieved. "So," Ethan stopped. "So? When this is over," he narrowed his eyes. "What?" The princess smiled mischievously. "I still think Temporary Rescue Hero is an excellent title." Ethan groaned. Around the camp, exhausted soldiers laughed. Then the laughter died, because directly behind the princess, something enormous began rising silently from the black water. And this time, everyone could see it. The enormous shape rose silently behind Princess Lyana. Across the camp, every soldier froze. Every scientist stopped speaking. Even the queen's advisors stood motionless. The thing emerging from the swamp was not merely large. It towered above the wetlands like a living mountain. Ancient roots twisted around metallic structures buried beneath layers of biological growth. Blue light flowed through glowing channels spread across its colossal frame. Yet, it did not attack. It simply watched. Its attention remained fixed on Ethan. The scientists scrambled to interpret incoming data. "The organism is active. We know that. It isn't displaying aggression." The commander frowned. "Then what's it doing?" No one answered. Far out in the swamp, Ethan slowly raised both hands, not because he expected it to help, because startling giant ancient biomechanical creatures rarely improve situations. The enormous being tilted slightly. Ancient symbols illuminated across its surface. Then something unexpected happened. A beam of pale blue light emerged from the creature and swept across Ethan. The entire camp held its breath. The scan lasted only seconds. Suddenly, ancient holographic symbols appeared in the air above the swamp. Lines of forgotten text filled the darkness. The Queen's historians immediately began translating. One elderly scholar gasped. "What is it?" asked Queen Elyra. The scholar stared at the symbols. "This is impossible." "Explain." His voice trembled. "This organism is not a monster." Everyone listened. "It is a guardian." More translations appeared. Ancient records, ancient memories, ancient vows. Thousands of years earlier, during a galactic catastrophe, the ancestors of Elyra's people had nearly become extinct. Their royal bloodline had been saved by a small group of human explorers who risked their lives to rescue them from a dying world. In gratitude, we First Queen had created a sacred vow. If a human ever again risked everything to save a member of the royal family, the ruling monarch must kneel before that human in eternal remembrance of the debt between their peoples. The Guardian had been created to preserve that promise forever. Silence spread across the camp. The ancient being had recognized the conditions of the vow. A human, risking his life, to save a royal child. The promise had been fulfilled. Meanwhile, Ethan finally reached Lyana. The princess smiled. "Took you long enough. You were sinking." "Details." He laughed despite himself. Carefully, he pulled her free from the mud. The swamp released her immediately, almost as if the Guardian itself had ordered it. When Lyana's feet finally touched solid ground, cheers erupted throughout the camp. Scientists celebrated. Soldiers embraced. Several officers looked suspiciously emotional. One technician openly cried. When somebody pointed it out, he replied, "I have allergies." Nobody believed him. Ethan lifted Lyana onto his shoulders. "Ready to go home?" The princess grinned. "Temporary rescue hero, lead the way." Together they crossed the wetlands. The Guardian watched them leave. Then, slowly, peacefully, it descended back beneath the swamp, its purpose complete. When Ethan finally reached the camp, thousands were waiting. Queen Elyra stepped forward. Her silver eyes met his. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, before the entire royal court, Before the soldiers, scientists, and citizens watching from orbit, the Queen knelt. The royal guards immediately followed, one after another. An entire army knelt. Shock spread through the crowd. Ethan nearly dropped the princess. "Should I kneel too?" A nearby guard looked horrified. "Please don't, we have no protocol for that." Laughter erupted across the camp. Even Queen Elyra smiled. When she rose, her voice carried clearly through the night. "Human Ethan Ward, today you saved my daughter. You honored an ancient promise and reminded us that courage is not measured by rank, bloodline, or power." Her gaze softened. "You have my gratitude, not as a queen, as a mother." For the first time all evening, Ethan found himself speechless. That surprised him more than the giant guardian. Weeks later, the story spread across the galaxy. The human explorer who succeeded where armies failed. The princess who never stopped making jokes while trapped in a death swamp. The queen who knelt before a stranger to honor a promise older than kingdoms. As for Ethan, he eventually prepared to leave Vera 9. But this time, something had changed. For years, he had wandered from world to world without attachments, always moving on. Now he had friends waiting whenever he returned. As his ship prepared for departure, Lyana appeared on the communication screen. "Don't forget." "Forget what?" "Your title." Ethan groaned. "There is no title." "There is." "No." The princess smiled triumphantly. "Temporary rescue hero." The transmission ended before he could argue. Ethan laughed. Then he guided his ship toward the stars. Behind him, the lights of Vera 9 faded into the darkness. Ahead lay countless unexplored worlds. But wherever his journey carried him next, he knew one thing for certain. Somewhere in the galaxy, a queen and her daughter would always consider him family. And that turned out to be a far greater treasure than anything he had ever hoped to find.